Welcome to our August Pathways Initiative Launch Committee Stakeholder Meeting. As for those of you who weren't on a minute ago, we've instituted some additional security measures, so a little more restrictions on video and audio. But again, we don't want this to restrict participation. So if you've got questions or comments as we go through, please raise your hand, please use the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to all of those pieces. Scott Miller. And you'll have to give Sarah a minute to make sure that we get, since we're maneuvering this in a different way. Sarah, there you go.
Yeah, no, she got it. Just quick, so chat's enabled, right? It wasn't earlier.
Hey,
Oh, I see it.
yeah,
Okay.
This is Sarah. Yes, I just enabled
Okay.
chat. I think I'm hoping that we're safe enabling chat. I'm a little shy from last week. But yes, chat is enabled.
Okay, good. I mean, who doesn't want to, throw in some, smarmy comments and stuff like that? Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, good question, Scott. Thank you. And we can go ahead and jump in. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide. We are going to cover a handful of things today, including some updates to the nominating committee process. We have gone over this at a few of our last stakeholder meetings, but we've got, I think, as we've also mentioned, we've kind of developed these things in pieces as we've gone through the bylaws development and the legal review for that. We've had some flags for things that we're needing to adjust a little bit in the nominating committee process. So we wanted to make sure that we shared those changes with folks. We are going to walk through the bylaws and the certificate of incorporation. That's kind of the big new document for review today. We're going to touch on the distinction for the stakeholder processes. This was something that we were going to cover last month. It was in the email update that we shared around, but I think it's important enough that we kind of touch on it again and make sure that if anybody has any comments or questions, that we can get those answered as well. Talk a little bit about our update on our sort of mechanics for funding the next several phases of the RO development. And then, as always, touch on next steps. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So the big item as far as language goes in the nominating committee process has to do with the role of the formation board. The other thing before I jump into that, I think the other thing that we're changing is essentially sort of the naming of this process. We're going to start referring to it as a board selection policy because that's how we're referring to it in our bylaws, which I think is a better capture of what we're actually doing through this process anyway. So you'll see our future references to the board selection policy rather than the nominating committee process, but they will ultimately be essentially the same thing. So as our attorneys have reviewed the draft bylaws, and then looked at the board selection policy that we developed already. One of the things that they flagged was in Delaware law, it can't be the launch committee as just a group that has the final approval on the initial slate of board members. It has to be the seated board. So we envision that really that this doesn't actually change sort of who's making this decision. The formation board, just as a reminder, is the formation committee. So it is that subcommittee of the launch committee. We still intend to get input and sort of buy off from the entire launch committee on the slate of initial board members. But ultimately it will be the formation board that makes that final vote on who the initial board members are. So again, We'll go through the whole nominating committee process where the nominating committee that is filled with sector representatives will identify a slate of board members. That slate will, once the nominating committee agrees on that slate, it will come to the launch committee, and the launch committee will kind of make sort of a determination of that slate, and then ultimately we'll go to the formation board. I'm going to pause, make sure that I have captured that all correctly. I'm looking for Evie on this to correct anything that I might have gotten wrong, but that wanted to make sure that people knew that this language was going to be different, but we don't envision that this is really changing anything about the results of that board selection process that we'll be going through for the initial board. Have you raise your hand if you have?
No, that's
Okay.
perfect, Kathleen.
Thank you so much. I'll pause for a second, see if anybody has any questions on this. All right. Well, then we'll keep going through the agenda. Next up is the bylaws and certificate of incorporation. And Evie, I am going to pass it over to you to walk us through the contents of those documents.
Sorry here. Here we go. Okay. Well, we've been working on the governance documents for the past few months, as I know a number of you have heard. And at this point in our work, we're kind of looking at two buckets of governance documents, although there will be more to come. And the first is the legal documents that are going to be required to legitimize the organization, that is from an external standpoint. And then what Kathleen went through, I would characterize as internal organization policy documents that we're working on. And this is really the first that we've attacked, but there will be other ones like the mission statement and other types of policy documents that you'll see referred to in the bylaws. And we've been going through this process with our counsel, Perkins Coie, kind of guided by Buck Endeman and Rick Sebchik out of the Chicago office. So it's been a very time-consuming process. So what I wanted first to do was to talk about the certificate of incorporation, which is also referred to articles in other states, and the bylaws. And starting with the certificate of incorporation, you'll notice on the top, the name is probably inaccurate on the draft you got, but it's the Regional Organization for Western Energy, which is in fact what's on the bylaws. So the ROWE. We went round and round about names. One of them was the Western Energy Regional Organization, which is WERO. And folks thought that sounded a bit too much like weirdo. So we've gone with ROWE, but that's certainly, we're always open to suggestions if there's a better way to capture this. And it will be filed as a Delaware non-stock corporation, which is similar to a public benefits corporation in California. And it will qualify as a 501c3 under the IRS rules. And at some point after we get the bylaws and the certificate filed, we'll be filing a Form 1023 with the IRS to gain that status. And the certificate of incorporation really is just a very broad document. You're not going to see any specialization or much tailoring in that document at all. It's just a very generic set of incorporation principles. Moving on to the bylaws, that's where we get a little more detailed. It's specifying the purpose of the organization, and it is addressing a range of other issues that we thought needed to be specialized in the document. And it points to additional policies, like I mentioned earlier. So it points to, for example, an open meetings and records policy. It points to future committees or bodies like the Public Policy Committee of the board. So it kind of is a pointer to other things that will be developed over time. And it also aligns with the board selection policy, which is what Kathleen just went through. So moving on to the next slide, while the purpose is a very a straightforward purpose, I guess, it's to provide independent regional governance. And it is obviously to facilitate certain voluntary energy market services and functions. So those two are the most important thing, that it's independent regional governance and that it's fairly broad, not only energy markets, but it's going to facilitate any services or functions that the RO develops over time. Next slide. We did want to call out a couple of areas. Scott? Scott?
And I'm sorry, Evie, give me just a sec
Oh,
to
okay.
mute him.
I'm not used to Scott being restrained, so forgive my confusion.
Nice, Evie. So with regard to the broad language that you noted in terms of what the purpose of this is, of the governance, is that could incorporate, among other things, when you said services, if people decided to move to something like an RTO. Is that right?
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
and we specifically use the word function in there as well, so it's services and functions. So
Okay.
I would view that certainly as encompassed within services and functions.
That the reason I ask is that issue came up in an Energy Bar Association discussion yesterday, in terms of the ability of it to eventually, if people wanted to get to the RTO. So, okay, thank you very much. And I will try to continue to be restrained.
Okay. So we wanted to highlight Article 4 because this is really the aardvark and the cats and dogs of the bylaws, I would say. This is where we're talking about public interest. And obviously this is a 501c3, so some public interest reference is important here. But we've gone deep into the weeds on what we mean here with respect to respecting state policies and protecting consumer interests. And we haven't pulled out every possible consumer interest or issue into the bylaws. We pulled in many of the central ones. But for example, it sets up the body of state regulators' role and importantly, its funding. It establishes the Stakeholder Representatives Committee and its role. It adds the new Public Policy Committee of the board, which we think is a good public interest function that's been used to augment and go beyond where the CAISO is today. It sets up funding for a new consumer advocate organization, again, pointing toward public interest, an Office of Public Participation, which is, again, something new, an expanded role of the market monitor. And that issue is, we're kind of trying to nail down the language specifically right now, but there will be an expanded role for the market monitor. And we have added in recently the aim of reducing overall economic costs to customers in participating states. So it kind of touches on a range of issues that are important from a consumer protection standpoint. Over on the right there, looking at the state authority, this has been something that's been important all along, which is we're developing a regional organization. So we need to make sure that we don't trample the rights of the states in the process. So it's kind of hard to articulate this, which we found in trying to write SB 542. What does it mean to respect state authority? But this is kind of a statement of what is meant, and it's consistently acknowledge, and where practicable, because it won't always be, develop tariff changes, rules, or business practices that respect and accommodate the state's achievement of their own objectives, and there's a list of them there. And so the goal is to keep them in mind, to be open to hearing about how their changes will affect other states, but for the states to recognize, states may have conflicting objectives as well. So it's really something that's hard to get precise, but I think we all know what the general thrust is, which is, mutual respect of the RTO in the states in which it operates. Next slide.
Sorry, Evie, just a sec. Give me just 1 second.
I can just go on with it while you're doing that.
Okay, thank you.
The next slide just points out a range of other topics that are included in the bylaws. I don't think anything's going to be surprising there. Board selection, meetings and voting, self-dealing, how the chair and the chair committees or the board committees work, how officers are laid out, records, and importantly, there is kind of an open records concept and indemnification and a bunch of miscellaneous cats and dogs at the end. So in those respects, it's fairly typical, although it is tailored to, for example, the board selection policy we've developed. Next slide. And this is the timeline. We are about midway through the process as we view it. So we've gone through the formation committee and had feedback from the formation committee. We've now gone through the launch committee and had their feedback, and lo and behold, it's landing with you for feedback. So that's what's in progress now. In the process, from the very beginning and probably until we file them, we will be working with our counsel, our outside counsel, in doing this. And then our goal is to get these ready to file by the beginning of the year. We chose to wait until the beginning of 26, so we don't have don't have to account for a corporate year of 2025 in any way. So we're just making a clean cut at January of 2026. Okay, so this isn't going to be your last opportunity to see these documents at any rate. You'll see, a further draft at some point, and before we file the Form 1023, you'll see a copy of that as well. Any questions that we can cover today? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Evie. And again, we'll touch base at the end and make sure that if anybody has questions that pop up between now and the end of this meeting, we can touch on those. Wanted to spend a minute just kind of walking through the different stakeholder processes that are ongoing. I know this has gotten a little confusing because there's a lot going on. But just as we're starting to develop some of the stuff related to the RO, and the CAISO continues its process, we sort of have this 2-year period. What are all these different forums that are ongoing? How can people continue to engage? So we thought it was worth making sure that people understand who's running which processes, and where you need to engage on which issues. So the primary distinction is, and again, this is for the period between now and when the RO has the tariff is fully functional with the tariff authority, really thinking about kind of January of 2028. So between now and January 2028, we sort of have 2 primary stakeholder functions going on. One is that that the launch committee is going to continue to run, and then ultimately once we have the RO board, the initial RO board in place, the launch committee will be working with the RO board on the stakeholder processes. And then the other is those stakeholder processes that are run by the CAISO. For the next 2 years, they will be happening concurrently. As a reminder, that the launch committee and the RO related processes are only covering the process to get the RO off the ground. So, and that governance piece. So thinking about these fundamental corporate documents, thinking about, we'll get input on staffing descriptions, we'll get input on, the structure of the RO, and things that are specifically related, even the stakeholder process itself that the RO will run starting in January of 2028 through the stakeholder representative committee. So as we continue to figure out what that needs to look like, all of those processes will be run by and led by the launch committee and the RO board. The CAISO is going to continue to run their stakeholder processes related to EIM and EDM initiatives. They will be the ones running the stakeholder process for the tariff change that enables the RO to have authority over the markets, because it is still that CAISO tariff that needs to get changed. And then the RIF will continue to operate as it does today. For those of you who have participated in the Regional Issues Forum, there have been some ongoing discussions about enhancements to the RIF, some of which have been are based on some of the recommendations and discussions that we've had through this process. But the RIF is something that is very separate, so that will continue to operate and be run in the same way that it is currently being run. So wanted to make sure that people understood that there's a very clear distinction between what we're doing through the launch committee and the RO versus what the CAISO is going to continue to be doing. When we're talking about things like the tariff change, and then even the relationship between the RO and the CAISO, the pieces of that warrant stakeholder input, we'll be working together. We'll be working closely with the CAISO, but ultimately, particularly that tariff change process is a CAISO. It's a CAISO tariff change, so they will be the ones that are managing that stakeholder process. Eventually, once we get the RO off the ground, we'll have the stakeholder representative committee that will be the RO's version of the regional issues forum. It's going to be up to the CAISO to determine what they want to do, and stakeholders who are participating in the RIF, what do they want to do with the RIF? The existence of the SRC does not preclude the existence of the RIF. That'll be something, sort of what those things look like will be something that will ultimately we'll be working on the SRC. The CAISO will go through its process on the RIF side to determine what that looks like. So just wanted to make sure that we made it very clear that these are very separate processes. We encourage you all to engage in as much as you possibly can, recognizing that there is a lot going on. So at that point, maybe I'll pause and see if there's any questions about these stakeholder process distinctions. All right, seeing no hands and nothing in the chat, we can keep going. And with this, I'm going to pass it over to Jim Shetler to provide a bit of an update on how we're approaching raising the funding for the next phase of the RO. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Kathleen. Just kind of a quick update around this. And as was noted by Evie, we're looking at not filing documentation for incorporation until January of 2026. And as a result of that, it's kind of delayed some of the efforts we were thinking about may need to get started in 2026. So we're thinking that the fourth quarter of 2025. The fourth quarter of 2025 will be the formation committee and the launch committee getting ourselves better organized for kicking off the efforts starting in 2026, such as going out for a RFP for a selection firm, those kind of things, but not any large expenditures the fourth quarter. So we have looked at it and we have sufficient funding in the bank account to cover us through the end of 2025. When we look at 26 and 27, what we're looking at right now is a budget that says a roughly $2 million expenditure in 2026 and about a $4.8 million expenditure in 2027. Now, to date, we have basically gone through pledges and donations to try to fund this effort. We acknowledge that $7 million are going to be tough to do that way, but we're going to at least start there. We have developed an updated pledge form and a funding agreement, a draft funding agreement that we run through the formation committee for review, and we're in the process of reviewing with the launch committee. with the hope of getting that finalized here in the next couple of weeks that can be used to solicit funding. I have had discussions with the EDAM entities slash the larger PTOs in California and suggested that we should be considering coming up with about half of that funding. And so we're having dialogue around that now about how that might work and how allocation might come up. Obviously, there are others, stakeholders who have funded in the past and are committed to fund in the future, and we'll be drawing on that as well. And then I'm looking at some other considerations. I know some other or efforts where new organizations have been formed have been done through debt financing, and we're at least going to look at that as a potential option. So bottom line is pledge form should be ready here in the next month, and we will be coming out and soliciting funding. And we're setting this up where people could fund over time. We're not necessarily asking for a full commitment day one. But we do need to get some funding in place starting in January of next year in order to support the 2026 budget. So with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions. I think I can turn it back to you, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Jim. Jessica, give it a second. We'll get to you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Kathleen. Good morning.
Morning.
Thanks for that. I just had a small question related to the funding. Who would be the entity under any kind of a debt financing situation that would be the obligated entity seeking the debt financing?
Yet to be determined.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a very new idea that I'm pursuing, and we haven't gotten into details, and that's one of the key issues is who will be the one carrying the debt.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Jim. Anyone else? All right. So at this point, our next steps are, again, looking to get commitments to fund this next phase of the RO and all of the support we're going to need. We've walked through the budget a handful of times here, but a good chunk of that funding is the board members, some of the initial staff as we get a little closer to 2028. So those are some of the bigger expenses, and then all of the support from the legal side and the consulting side that we're going to need to get this go through the next phases of RO development. If you have any questions, the budget is posted. The draft budget is posted on the WEAB website, so I encourage you to take a look there. We are opening up a comment period on the bylaws and the certificate of incorporation. And then, of course, if there's anything else that you want to provide comments and feedback on, we will accept comments on, we're always accepting comments and feedback, but specifically for the bylaws, we are going to have a 3-week time period. This is longer than the 2 weeks that we've done on other things because there's a little more substance to this. So that comment period will go from essentially today until September 19th. Please take a look. Let us know your thoughts. We'll take comments on everything from the name to any of the substance that's in there as well. And then we are, just as a reminder, continuing to work on sector development. So we want to make sure that we've got each of the 9 sectors that were identified in the final proposal from last fall that those sectors are starting to self-organize and identify who they want as their representative on the nominating committee. So if you have questions about who's, what sector you belong in, or who you need to be talking to about getting engaged in that, feel free to reach out to Sarah or myself. We're happy to point you in the right direction. Or if you know who sort of represents your sector on the launch committee, please reach out to them as well. I saw the question in the chat about SB 540. We're not going to speak to that on this call because, again, the launch committee is not lobbying and not participating in that process as a body. But of course, there are several of us who are happy to have conversations offline if you'd like to follow up. Any questions about next step? All right, our next meeting is going to be at the end of September, September 26th, same time. And then again, all of our materials are on the WE website. And we look forward to hearing from folks on the documents that we walked through today. Thanks again for your participation and your willingness to join and continue to participate in all of the development of the RO. Thanks, everyone.